Okay, we return. Like MacArthur, I shall return. Go ahead, caller. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, Mike, I want to give you a little input here.
All right.
You're pretty good at drafting legislation, and the Missouri Constitution, and I also think the federal Constitution allows it, that if the citizens want to change the legislation, they have to circulate a petition. I think it's 250,000 votes in Missouri to get the Secretary of State to put it on the ballot up to a vote, and then the people can vote it in, and the legislature has nothing to do with it, because then people ain't never going to do nothing that's going to cut their throat.
You're talking about a constitutional amendment?
I'm talking about legislation, like they want to legalize marijuana, but nobody knew it was out there.
Oh, I see. Okay, so in other words, if you get 250,000 people to say we're passing this legislation, it doesn't have to go through the General Assembly.
Exactly. It goes on the ballot of the general election, and being on an off year, that's like the city does. They put something they want passed on an off year, and I think it only takes 51% of the majority to pass it. And so you're good at drafting stuff, and if you would draft up a petition for a right to work, and also that recall petition to recall the senators and the representatives, and have an approval every election, and if they lose the approval and they get disapproved, they have to run for a re-election in April. And we've had the election set, and that will make these people start doing their job, and we can pass it in this state, and I believe we will. The people will, if they see it out there, and you've got the access by the internet and everything, and you're good at drafting, because the legislature ain't going to do nothing. It's like the seatbelt law. It was supposed to be just a warning. Now it's a ticket.
Yeah.
And they said, we'll never do that. Well, 3 years later, that's exactly what they'll do. They'll stop you for that. And so you can't trust them SOBs. And but if you draft the petition and put it on the internet, I'm pretty sure you can garner 250,000 or whatever it takes.
Well, I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, but I have to tell you, trying to get 250,000 cats to all go in the same direction is pretty hard to do.
We're all mad at these legislatures that take our money and put drones on us and take our guns and all, and that, all that good stuff. And I think you'll get it. I think you. And if you don't, what you got to lose? They're going to tell you no. It's like a girl, ask her out. But most you can do is tell you no.
Well, that's a good point, and I've been told no many times.
Exactly. Yeah, gotta go get you another ride, sweetheart.
Yeah.
The ocean's full of fish like you. But I'm serious, and especially on the recall and also on the right to work. The legislatures ain't going to do nothing.
All right.
They're better than they ain't going to drop it.
Right. Well, okay, I appreciate that. And, let me think a little bit about the best way to accomplish that goal.
And it's honest, too. She's pretty sharp on that stuff.
Yeah, she's very sharp.
She's a great woman.
Yeah, she really is.
Yeah.
She really is. Hey, thank you so much for the call and the encouragement. Thanks.
All right. Hang in there, bro.
All right, man. Talk to you later. Go ahead, caller. Welcome to the show.
I'll make this quick since I already talked to you this morning.
All right.
The gentleman is referring to a referendum process, which on the face of it is very democratic. However, I'd like to point out it is tied to the state of California in knots.
Yeah.
One group gets a referendum, another group gets a referendum.
Right.
It is a never-ending rat hole.
No, I got you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other problem is, I don't know how many residents Missouri has. I don't know off the top of my head what our population is, but in order to get 250,000 people to all move in one direction on any one thing is like, oh my goodness, But I understand his point, and I do believe that to a certain extent, it is going to take that kind of groundswell, grassroots type activism in order for us to force our government, whether that's state or federal, to actually start operating as it's supposed to. In other words, we've got to have the ability to nullify them. Whether
I
that's,
absolutely agree. Yes,
and we're seeing. I will say one thing in defense of the states. In the last couple of years, you are seeing an enormous resurgence in the principles of nullification and in interposition, and I'm encouraged by it. I'm afraid it may be a little too little, too late, But when you've got states that are passing legislation on literally almost on a daily basis, you see another state that came out and passed a anti-NDAA nullification bill or a firearms nullification bill. That kind of stuff, to me, means that the support out there for the constitutional-minded people is far greater than the lamestream media would have us to believe. They want us to think that we're outnumbered 80 to 20 on the liberal side.
Yeah.
And that's the impression that they give us. And it's constantly reinforced. Like Obama will get up there and stand there and say, well, most Americans agree. Whoa. Where did you come up with that most Americans agree crap? Most Americans agree that most Americans agree that you shouldn't be president, frankly, at this point. And most Americans would agree that you got a 20-year sentence for the treason and the betrayal that you've committed against our country in your oath of office. So, I think at this point, what we have to recognize is that first, we're fed lots and lots of lies. And I think that the American base, the average Joe, whether they're living in New York or whether they're living in L.A. or whether they're living in Milwaukee or West Plains, is, for the most part, we are a center-right country, right? We've heard that term many times before.
I don't know how much longer that's going to be, but yes, so far.
Even people who are on the dole and dependent upon the government actually believe that in most cases the government is wrong about everything except the fact that they write them a check. So, unfortunately what happens is that when it comes time to actually vote, they start voting, for their own personal largesse out of the largesse of our treasury instead of their conscience and doing the right thing, And honestly, it's perpetuated by fear by politicians who sit there and throw this stuff out there that, well, if you vote for those Republicans, they're going to cut welfare, and then everybody's like, oh my goodness, I better vote for Obama.
I agree. I just want to point out that the referendum process, as it's applied to the state of California, has been a snake that turns around and bites you in the butt every time.
Well, thank you for bringing me back full circle too.
If it once you don't secede, try again.
Right. Once you don't secede, I like interposition and nullification as the initial steps between secession and tyranny. Well, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. Like the principle, interposition and nullification are the idea that secession is the final step that you can take as a last resort.
Which secession was taught as a right of the state at West Point up until 1845.
There you go.
And when you wonder, when we came to that war they call the Civil War,
right,
which there was like nothing civil about it.
Well, that settled it.
Yeah, the reason
the hell it did.
The reason that most of those generals from the South went to fight for their states was because that was the class of 1845. And they had been taught that secession was, in fact, a right of the states.
And it is a right of the states. This is an agreement and a contract. And no one can hold you in a contract once it's been violated by one party to the contract. When it goes to the heart of the agreement, right? If two of us sign an agreement that we're going to do this thing together, whatever that thing may be, and it involves, the one party who turns around and violates the core tenets of the agreement, the other party is therefore released from the contract. And that's exactly where we are at today, where our states have agreed to a compact of a union that says we are willing and able to conjoin our forces and relinquish a certain limited number of rights so that for the benefit of all, everyone can live a life where the federal government has these limited powers that can, be utilized on our behalf for our best interests. And what unfortunately happens is that, the whole thing has been usurped to the point where the states were supposed to be more powerful than the federal government, and we've lost that whole, mantra. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about drones this morning.
Yeah.
I called the FAA yesterday, and the lady was very nice and very polite there, and she said that I was the first citizen to call up that she knew of about those drones.
You're kidding me, right?
No, and she said that she was with me 100%. I told her about that one that just about hit that Italian airliner.
Yeah, in New York on Kennedy Airport or something, right?
Right.
Flying at like 1,800 feet.
Well, yeah, 1,500 I heard. But anyway, he had his flaps down. He reduced his airspeed. He's coming in for landing. If that thing would have went into his jet engine, it would have killed everybody on board that plane, because at that altitude, going slow like that, he was never had time to recover from that.
Right.
And they're flying at 30,000, they're flying at 20,000, and there's going to be more and more of them. And that drone, nobody ever stepped up and said, "Oh, that was our drone." And that's exactly what's going to happen. Somebody's going to get killed. And then, whoever's drone it was, whether it's the police, the FBI, the Air Force, the CIA, the Highway Patrol, you think they're going to stand up there and say, "Oh, yeah, well, that was our drone that killed everybody"? They're all going to go, "Oh, we don't know nothing about it. We don't know nothing about it." But anyway, here's 762-9434, and that's the FAA, and that's about accidents, and that's a toll-free number. So anybody that don't like those drones can give.
Okay, let me just confirm that number with you. It's 866-762-9434.
You got it.
Okay. Wow. What really stuns me about what you just told us is that you're the first citizen to call.
Well, that's what the lady said.
And folks, if that's not proof positive that we feel powerless as a people, I don't know what better example we can give you. Thank you very much for the call.
Yeah, I haven't been having any luck with the legislators.
No, I get it. All right. So go straight to the administrative agency. I get it. Hey, listen, thank you for the call.
All
right, man. Folks, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we will hopefully get to Mr. Benjamin Wassel of Silver Creek, upstate New York, who was arrested Thursday and charged with violating the most restrictive gun law in America by the People's Republic of New York. Governor Cuomo over there is acting like a little Hitler, and we're going to talk about it. We'll be right back.
Having difficulty with your computer? Do you think it has a mind of its own? Well, don't be alarmed. This happens to everyone at some point in time. Worry no more. Computer Dave and Kyle can help you out with PC Geeks, a weekly show right here on 107.1 The Point. Tune in Thursdays at 1 o'clock to ask computer-related questions and listen to the web topic of the week. That's PC Geeks here on 107.1 The Point.
That was probably the fastest and most painless break we've ever given you folk. All right, so we're going to get to poor Benjamin. For those of you who don't know, the communist nation of New York has passed the most anti-gun law in the State of the Union. They have passed a gun ban that basically makes thinking about a gun a crime. Benjamin Wassel, a gentleman from Silver Creek in upstate New York, was arrested Thursday and charged with violating this law, which was passed in the wake of the Sandy Hook massacre, using that as the excuse, which I find reprehensible in and of itself. This piece of trash Cuomo, the governor of New York, is actually really what his real motive is. He doesn't give a damn about New Yorkers. All he's interested in is what's in it for me on 2016 when I can put my name into the hat and toss my hat into the ring for the presidency. And that's the truth, people. Now, Wassel was reportedly entrapped by a New York cop who told Wassel at one meeting that he had a prior felony conviction. And Wassel sold him two semi-automatic rifles, an AR-15 and an Armalite AR-10. They reference it here as a Magnum rifle.
That's a special Magnum.
Reality check, folks. A Magnum is not a 308, and an AR-10 is a 308. So
it's a special AR-10.
Apparently.
Only the New York State Police has it.
Apparently. I mean, if you don't know the difference between a Magnum and whether a 308 qualifies as a Magnum or not, perhaps what you should be is going to gun school, especially if you're going to be in the business of removing them from the street. Anyway, That, along with 300 rounds of ammunition, was sold to this guy, and the sale is a felony under the recently enacted law. So now Wassel is facing up to 7 years in prison. The frame-up was the result of a joint investigation between the Attorney General's office and the New York State Police. So this New York attorney, A.G. Schneiderman, was quick to exploit the undercover sting for all of its propaganda potential. Here's his comments. By selling these illegal firearms, Mr. Wassel's actions had potentially dangerous consequences for New Yorkers. We have seen far too much gun violence in our state in recent months, and the sale of illegal semi-automatic weapons will not go unpunished. Excuse me while I fix my neck. I commend the work of investigators in this case who helped send a message that these types of illegal gun sales will not be tolerated.
But what the publicity is really all about is making people within the firearms owning community scared of each other. Scared of each other.
Bingo. We are going to make an example of poor Mr. Benjamin Wassel, who didn't do anything that wasn't a crime a month ago and is now. The defendant is accused of illegally selling assault weapons, not once, but twice, said New York State Police Superintendent Joe D'Amico. After that, he was willing to sell. I just had to switch into my Italiano accent there because, hey, his name is D'Amico. It's Joey. Add to that, he was willing to sell to someone without knowing anything about their background, and it's exactly the type of dangerous and illegal activity that can lead to more gun violence in our communities. Once again, our partnership with the Attorney General's office has resulted in taking a dangerous criminal off the streets.
What is gun violence? I have never seen a gun be violent.
Me neither. So now, here's my take on this. And some of you may disagree with this, but I'm going to challenge your perceptions and your ideas about it. And if you disagree with me, I want you to call me and tell me why. Don't just throw it under the bus. I want to hear from you why you think I'm wrong. And you better have a good, logical, and well-reasoned argument, because we're going to go back and forth on it. I believe that our Constitution says that the rights of our citizens to own firearms shall not be infringed. The word shall is definitive. And the Second Amendment is a last resort against tyranny in government. I mean, Thomas Jefferson said that. Those are not words of wisdom from me. So the principle stands to reason that the Second Amendment is really a founding father's concept of the policy of mutually assured destruction, oftentimes referred to as MAD. Now, what is MAD? Well, MAD is the idea that you have two nations who are enemies, and they both have nuclear weapons. And the policy of MAD states that if one throws bombs, I throw twice as many bombs, and we basically wipe each other out. And under this threat that we could be mutually destroyed, we agree not to, step on each other's toes. Well, here's the principle of MAD for the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is never intended to be used. It's not. The Second Amendment is its real goal and design is to be a deterrent against government acting in a treasonous fashion. Now, I am a firm believer, and I am because I have a personal bias about this, that felons should not be prohibited from owning firearms except under certain circumstances. And I do qualify this with some individuals should be. One, if you have proven that you are a danger to the community, and I mean a true danger, not some kind of crap danger like these jerks are pumping out here. If you are a danger to the community in the sense that, you have a history of robbing people at gunpoint, or if you have a history of, beating up old ladies to steal their purses, or you have committed a truly violent act. And when I say a violent act, I'm not talking about the way that the federal government defines violent. They define it as a threat or brandishing a firearm. Believe it or not, brandishing a firearm, opening your coat to show a kid on the street, I'm not the right guy for you to mess with, that's actually called brandishing a firearm. That's a threat, and it becomes a violent crime. Now, with all due respect, that's not violence. And so I believe that everyone, felon or otherwise, unless they have proven through truly violent action, has the right to own firearms. If you have made a mistake in your past regarding a drug charge, or you've embezzled money, or whatever the case may be, that does not make you a violent criminal.
Wait a minute. Those embezzler guys, they're pretty dangerous.
I'm not suggesting that they're not dangerous. I am suggesting that they're not dangerous to life. I'm suggesting that they may be dangerous to your pocketbook, and there's ways to deal with that. But I am saying that if you have committed violent acts, not pre-crime violence, but a true violent crime, I'm okay with saying, okay, you've robbed banks at gunpoint. You are forever barred because we can't trust you. Just like I'm also okay with the idea that you have committed rape, and so we are going to chemically castrate you.
Ooh. It doesn't sound good.
Chemically is a non-surgical method, and it works. I mean, it stops the sexual urge. Now, it stops the sexual act. Let me rephrase that.
Then you eat a lot of potato chips.
Now, here's the idea. If you have committed a violent crime, you can be barred from possessing a firearm. However, there has to be some limit of review upon that, and you have to have an opportunity to be able to go back and say, I've turned my life around. It's been 20, 25 years. I might have done something stupid when I was younger, and I got into a fight. We were drunk. I smacked a guy over the head with something, and I'm now 45 years old. I'm married. I've got 3 children, and I've got a job, and I've got a home, and I pay my taxes, and I haven't been in trouble, not even so much as a speeding ticket, and I should have my rights back. That's not an unreasonable expectation, folks. Because if what you're going to say is that every crime that someone commits is a life sentence, then that is a violation of the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution against unreasonable. I can't think of the word. I don't know why I'm just drawing a blank here. I just had a brain freeze. Cruel and unusual punishment. Thank you, Michael, for remembering. So here's the problem. If every crime that we commit is guaranteed to come with a life sentence, then we don't really truly have justice in this nation. Even in the days of our founders, you had to commit an actual crime in order for them to want to remove you from society. Now, I'm not saying that a kid who's, selling dope is not acting wrongfully. But I am going to say that a kid who's either buying or selling or whatever, 20, 15, 10, 30, 40, 50 years later, should not be prohibited from owning a firearm.
Well, and the interesting thing is that group of people that you're talking about that goes out and robs banks or sticks people up or shoots them or does any of those violent felonies that you're talking about, those are the very people that they're going to get a gun
either way.
Either way.
Right. I mean, if you're going to go kill somebody, you're really not worried about being charged with a gun.
Right.
The simple truth is that it's and proof positive of this, by the way, is that the law in New York used to be that, and coming from the Eastern Seaboard, I used to hear this all the time. The law used to be, or the rule used to be, if you were going to rob a store or something like that the right way to deal with it is if you knew that you were going to get caught because you heard the sirens coming, shoot somebody in the leg. What? Yeah, that's right. You know why?
Go.
Because you got more time for armed robbery than you did for attempted murder. I kid you not.
Nice.
I kid you not. Now, and of course they always go for the worst charge. Now, of course, they charge you with armed robbery and attempted murder and sneezing in public and
terroristic threats,
50 other things they can stack on top. But that used to be the kind of rule of thumb was if you were a criminal, shoot somebody if you think you're going to get caught, and then they'll hit you with the lesser charge. Folks, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about this.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu in Vatican City. Rousing applause for the new pope, who's just held his first meeting with the press. In his address before thousands of journalists and others, Pope Francis explaining his immediate inspiration for the name he chose, St. Francis of Assisi, known as a man of the poor and a man of peace.
At the end, when he met the journalists, he greeted a lot of them as if they were old friends. Admittedly, many of them were from Argentina, they were from South America, but he was embracing them, shaking hands with them, holding both their hands, and some he embraced, as I say, gave him a big hug. I was half expecting the next person in line to give him a high five. He seemed to get on that well with people.
Nick Peter with Fox Sister Network Sky News. Fire crews in northern Colorado hoping for calmer weather in the fight against the first major wildfire of the season. It's charred up to 1,000 acres. Fox News, we report, you decide.
Thanks to Jason over at Wits End Classic Barbershop for sponsoring our phone lines. You can call our Wits End Classic Barbershop hotline, and you can get over there and get yourself a shave and a haircut. 2 bits. Well, a little bit more than 2 bits. Thanks to our friends over at Pizza Hut as well. On Porter Wagoner Boulevard, they have an outstanding lunch special, and on Tuesday nights, they have Kids Eat Free. Children under 12 eat for free. They're on Porter Wagoner Boulevard in West Plains. Make sure you visit Pizza Hut. Our friends at the Battery Station, 303 Washington Avenue at batterystation.com. You can also reach them via telephone at 257-7799. Folks over at West Plains Pawn and Gun. Kenny's a friend of ours and a great supporter of our program. 417-256-3000, located about a mile and a half on Route 160 past Walmart. You can reach him also on the web at westplainspawn.com. Ozark Mountain Self-Reliance, half-mile east of Walmart at Route 62 in Mountain Home. You can find them on the web at ozarkmtnselfreliance.com. And you can call them at 870-492-4030. My friend Mary over at Chantilly's Artisan Bakery, the best damn bakery in 100 miles. She can be reached at 417-255-2253. You can also find her at number 2 Evans Arcade. Outstanding bakery. Bill Stone over at Stone Construction at 2930116. Whether remodeling, building new, or doing some kind of custom construction, light commercial or farm work, Bill's the guy for you. 2930116.
I know what you're thinking, Bunk. You're thinking, did he fire 6 shots or only 5?
Dirty Harry gets all his ammo from the battery station. John Rambo, you guessed it. He gets his ammo from the battery station, too. So if you need ammo, go to the place where the guys who know about ammunition go, the battery station. They have one of the largest supplies of ammunition in the area. So make sure you're stocked up and don't get low on shells. Go to the battery station at 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains.
Weather sponsorships are now available on News Talk 107.1 The Point. Get more information, email info@diamondmediaradio.com for complete details.
From the Point Weather Center, as we head into the evening, a clear sky. It'll be clear to partly cloudy overnight, the low 52. Turns out cloudy tomorrow, maybe an afternoon shower, high 64. A good chance of showers tomorrow night into the day on Sunday, low tomorrow night 40, Sunday's high 46. I'm staff meteorologist Jim Rinaldi, and for more information, visit my1071thepoint.com.
The area's best selection of firearms and ammunition can only be found at West Plains Pawn and Jewelry. Top-of-the-line handguns from Kimber, Smith & Wesson, Ruger, Glock, Beretta, and many more. A wide selection of ammunition, including blanks, centerfire handgun and rifle, rimfire, a variety of shotgun shells, target, and turkey. With new arrivals every week, the area's best selection of firearms and ammunition can only be found at West Plains Pawn and Jewelry, 1713 West U.S. Highway 160, or shop online at westplainspawn.com.
I have returned, so said MacArthur. And Michael. Okay, caller, go ahead. Welcome to the show. So we were throwing out the idea here that criminals are not all created equal.
True, they're not. I did some research for a friend several years ago. He was trying to get his firearms rights restored. Unfortunately, he was convicted in the state of Missouri, which doesn't have a really clear-cut methodology for that. Matter of fact, it's just right next to getting a pardon from the governor, and you know how often that happens.
Yeah.
My understanding is that relatively in relative history terms, fairly recently, the disability of felons to own a firearm began overall in the state of California back in 1928.
How am I not surprised?
It started
all good things start in California.
And of course, bear in mind, this is a time of great social unrest in the United States. You saw such things as the Sullivan Act in New York State, the 1934 Firearms Act.
Right.
A lot of stuff getting passed over this at that time because of the big scare thing going on, and gangsters and Dillinger and all that.
Sure.
So there was a reason for that taking place, not necessarily a good reason. For instance, I'm not a big fan of the 1934 Act. I figure if you want a machine gun, you should be able to purchase one, and there's a mechanism for that. A lot of people say they're illegal weapons. They're not strictly illegal.
Well, actually, and that's part of my discussion about the principle of MAD, which I'm going to get into in a minute. But go ahead, because MAD requires that both parties be equally armed.
The point being that several states have a methodology for restoring firearms rights, Missouri not being one of them, to people who have been convicted of nonviolent offender crimes.
Right.
However, there's pressure on that not to take place because the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms actually has a program that is supposed to help felons or criminals who are otherwise qualified to obtain firearms.
Have your civil rights, have your rights to own firearms restored.
And I keep refusing to fund this program.
Right. Congress has essentially closed the loop. ATF said, we don't really want to do these. And Congress said, okay, we'll help you because we'll just say we're not funding the program. But we're going to...
control of firearms is supposed to be a state thing. I mean, each state constitution has an effect in there, but the Fed seems to be closing that off.
Well, they can't fund the ability of the ATF to do background checks on felons to clear them for firearms ownership, but we do have the money to be able to afford why lesbians are fatter than non-lesbians.
And I'd like to point out this is a long-running thing. You know, we're talking about late 60s, early 70s. This thing's been going on with the ATF at that time.
Right.
It's not a new thing. People have actually pushed moderately for this, but it hasn't happened.
Sure.
And obviously, the Fed restricting it, even though I don't feel they have a right to occlude state law. And like I said, I'm not a lawyer on this, but I have done some research on it.
Right. Well, I get it. And my concern with it is that, you see, what we're asking government to do when we go back to them and we say, may I please have my right to own a gun? We're asking government for the right to own something which they don't have the right to give us. We already own it and possess that natural right in and of itself.
Exactly right.
It's the right of self-defense. It's the right of self-determination. It's the right of independence. It's the right of property ownership. It is the right to life, liberty, property ownership, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, here's the other example that I'm going to throw out there on the felon thing. When you're a felon, you're forever barred from owning a firearm. But so is everyone else who lives within your home. Because one can't exist in your home because the argument would be, well, it's not mine, it's his, or it's not mine, it's hers, or it's not mine, it's whatever. So basically what they do is by turning people into felons, they are eliminating Second Amendment rights from hundreds of millions of people who aren't really necessarily felons. I shouldn't say hundreds of millions. I'm going to say millions. Because if you're going to live in the home with a felon, then you're barred from having access to a firearm, even though you've never even gotten so much as a traffic ticket. And that is the plan, right? Because what it does is well, first of all, it's a complete violation of their rights to be able to to exercise the Second Amendment as well.
You could probably challenge as cruel and unusual punishment.
Well, the problem is, I guess nobody's willing to step up and say that and file the lawsuits and go through the necessary stuff. And honestly, you got groups out there like the NRA, and everybody says we need to keep mentally ill and felons. Oh, stop right there. That's the problem, is that the agencies or organizations, I'm not going to say agencies, the organizations who are supposed to be supporting Second Amendment rights immediately acquiesce to the felons are barred theory. And that's a mistake. Because, quite frankly, it's up to them to open up the national dialogue. They've got the ear of millions. I don't.
It's not going to happen otherwise.
It's not exactly. It's not going to happen otherwise. And
frankly, the felons and the mentally disturbed is an easy scapegoat right now. It's something that, frankly, that the gun people are using to take pressure off other arguments.
Well, I'm going to tell you what they do. Their argument is, well, we got to pick the most juicy battle. We can only fight certain battles. And it's like, no, there's always a juicy battle, and the felon always falls to the back of the line. And there are literally tens of millions of Americans who are forever barred from owning a firearm, who are not violent, who are not a danger to society, or to themselves, or anyone else. And that is cruel and unusual punishment. It is making a mistake in your earlier life, and in many cases not even really having made a mistake, because what kills me is people will sit there and say, well, the government is wrong about most everything. But then as soon as somebody gets charged with a crime, they're like, oh, they must be guilty. It's like, well, wait a second. Hold on a minute. Let's just check your rational thinking here for a minute. If the government is so wrong about everything else, how come they're right only when it comes to criminal law? I mean, please. The federal government has a 98% conviction rate, not because they're really good at it, but because they have enough pressure that they can sit on you like an elephant until you squeal uncle.
Exactly right.
Right? And so they basically destroy you by financial attrition and threats.
You know that as well as I do. That lots of people have been charged with crimes and have simply pled out it because they don't want to impoverish and bankrupt their family. I mean, some of the cheapest criminal trials are $60,000, and most of them go far more than that.
Right. But in addition to that, you know, what happens is when they offer you this plea agreement, they say, well, you're either going to accept this plea agreement or we're going to stack 13 other charges on top of you. So it's not just a question of you agreeing because, you know, I mean, the old adage of you can indict a ham sandwich applies, right? You may not find me guilty, even if I say I'm going to fight this to the end. They may not be able to beat you on or get you convicted on the one thing that they originally charge you with, the big crime. But all they got to do is find you guilty of one of the little ones, and it's just as bad. What?
Well, the phrase in New York used to be, you might beat the rap, but you won't beat the ride.
There you go. There you go. So, all right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your input. Thanks. Good thoughts on it, though. Thanks.
You know, it's interesting what you just brought up about impairing the civil rights of the other people in the household. And to tell you the truth, until today, that had never occurred to me.
Oh, man, it's millions upon millions of people.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Go ahead, caller.
Yes, I want to clear up the story that's being perpetrated about a convicted felon in firearms in Missouri. I was arrested in October of 2009, and I was placed in jail for 29 days on a $500,000 bond for a convicted felon with firearms. A lawyer come to see me. There's no such law on Missouri statutes. The judge turned me loose. He said, well, the lawyer come back and he said, I can't represent you because they're going to turn it over to the feds, and I'm not a federal lawyer. I said, oh. And so they turned it over, and a year later, the feds picked it up and took me to Springfield, held me 6 months up there, and found me guilty, and only carried a year penalty. Because of the castle law, Missouri does not have a law against a convicted felon having a gun.
Right, but what happens is when Missouri declines to charge you, the feds do.
Only if the circuit judge pours it over to him. He happened to be a former prosecutor.
That's not true, and I happen to know for a fact that that's not true. What happens is every criminal or every charge, or every individual who is picked up as a convicted felon in possession of a firearm, all those records are immediately funneled to the circuit court for the federal side in Springfield. Let's say it's in this area because it goes to different districts. But whatever, then what happens is the attorney general in that particular given district evaluates it and says we're either going to charge him or we're not going to bother because he's too small change or he's not a risk or whatever.
They have a grand jury first.
But that's my point. Here's the problem. No, they don't even have to have a grand jury. He's just got to determine whether or not he wants to prosecute you. But here's my problem with that. That just shows you that law is not the law of the land evenly distributed. It's subjective, not objective. If the prosecutor can decline to prosecute you or choose to prosecute you, now he's cherry picking. And we're either all guilty or we're all not guilty. You can't have it both ways, and you can't leave it to men to make a decision about things like that. And so I get what you're saying. By the way, that and that was in 2009, you said.
Yes.
I believe there's been some change in the law in Missouri about that.
And another thing I'd like to point out to our listeners is is that the Highway Patrol knows anytime you buy a deer tag, because they told me every year that I bought a deer tag.
Yeah.
When they arrested me. So if you're a convicted felon and you bought a deer tag or hunting license, they know, and they can't come and lean on you because you signed a perjury deal when you buy the tag.
I got you. All right. Hey, listen, thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it. Folks, we'll be right back. You're listening to America's Voice now.
At American Family Insurance, we believe your farm is more than a business. It's your livelihood and your American dream, which is why you deserve the best farm insurance available. Let Barb Middleton show you the options available to protect your farm with your farm personal property coverage, to cover your animals, feed, machinery, and equipment in case of an accident, or blanket coverage, enabling you to flex your farm personal property coverage up to a blanket coverage limit. Call Barb Middleton at 256-7155 or visit amfam.com.
Napa Auto Parts in West Plains has this breaking news announcement. If you've got a British car and it quits, if you've got a Japanese car and it quits, if you've got a German car and it quits, come into Napa Auto Parts in West Plains, right across from the Civic Center. They speak automobile fluently. Yes, they do. And may be able to help you find the right parts to bring your car new life. Call ahead to reserve parts, 256-0131, or stop by 311 St. Louis Street, across from the Civics.
Hi, this is Sheila Murphy, store manager at Big Lots. We're located in the Southern Hills Shopping Center in West Plains, Missouri. Southern Hills is home to the best shopping establishment in South Central Missouri. Come visit some of your favorite department stores, and if a full day of shopping is on your list, there are also plenty of great places to eat when you get hungry. And they're all within walking distance. Southern Hills is the largest shopping center in the area and has everything you will be looking for. No need to leave West Plains. Stay local and shop local with Southern Hills Shopping Center. Proud to serve West Plains and the surrounding communities.
The Donut Palace in West Plains, where the customer is still king. If you're a school group, church group, sports team, or any group function, book it with the Donut Palace. Order 24 hours in advance and at least 3 dozen to receive 10% off your bill, and you won't have the burden of paying tax either. Open 7 days a week from 5 a.m. to 6 p.m. except Sundays when they close at 1. Call today at 417-256-0606 to have delicious hot and fresh donuts at your next meeting. Located at 914 Broadway in West Plains, the Donut Palace.
Okay, we are back. We have a caller on the line who wanted to comment on that last caller. Go ahead, caller.
Right. I don't know the particulars of the gentleman's case, but I know that revised Missouri Statute 571, which covers all the weapon offenses, it's very explicit about felons not owning firearms or ammunition, not even in their possession.
Right, and that's why I said to him, I think that law had been changed since his 2009. I think he said it was in 2009 he was arrested or something. But my point, and this whole, and I get what you're saying, and I think you are correct, by the way, that felons are barred from possession in the state of Missouri. What happens is that the state declines to prosecute them for whatever reason, and then the federal government then determines whether they get to go and tag you for the second time. It's kind of like tag team wrestling. Right.
I see that they're more than happy to do it. Is that it?
Well, it depends on who you are and what they think they want to do. First of all, they make their determination based on a lot of things. One, is there some publicity we can get out of this? 2, what's our caseload? 3, what's our odds of convicting this guy? And 4, what do we end up getting out of it? And the simple truth is that, and that's the problem with subjective law enforcement. You can't have a subjective law enforcement scenario where we decide whether we're going to prosecute you or not. Everybody's either guilty of violating the law or they're not. And you can't sit there and say, well, we're going to prosecute this guy but not this guy for the same exact crime. Right. And my point is that, first of all, the federal government has no business in the gun crime business at all, period. Unlike Bill O'Reilly, who thinks that every gun crime ought to be federal, which is an idiotic thought. The real issue is that our Constitution says the right shall not be infringed. End of argument, period. It's up to each individual state to make those determinations.
I would have to read the language of 571 again.
Are you an attorney?
I am not. I'm a handgun instructor.
Okay.
But I don't recall anything specific about the right to carry or the permit to carry for an individual who has a felon living in the home?
No, I can tell you right now that what that's called on the federal government side is called constructive possession. And so here's how they do it. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that I'm living in my home and my wife has a gun. Right? Now we're married. We live in the same house. At least one would. That's the normal course of America. If for some reason they determine to come in and search my home for something completely unrelated, they find a gun there, they charge me with possession through constructive possession.
Okay.
Now, constructive possession means we didn't actually catch you with it, but you had access to it. Now,
so even though there may not be a state law, there's a federal provision for it.
Exactly. And constructive possession actually goes this far. You and I are riding in your car. You've got a gun underneath the back seat. I don't even know is there. They pull us over. They decide to search the vehicle for whatever reason. You give permission, or they pull a warrant. Next thing you know, they say, well, this gun wasn't on your hip, so therefore we can't prove it's actually yours. We can charge him with constructive possession. And I'm not blowing smoke at you. There's a ton of guys in federal prison for that right now.
Well, right. I mean, I can't even. You'd have to have a computer program to keep up with all of the federal legislation.
I'm not even sure that works.
What happens if you have a guy that, like, one guy has a concealed carry permit, and he says, hey, Mike, I'm going to come over and pick you up, and we're going to go out to dinner, okay? And that guy's carrying concealed, and he's not thinking about it, okay? So he comes over, he picks you up, you get in the car with him, the two of you drive to the restaurant, okay? Then something happens, and the guy ends up having to use his firearm for something. So then you're going to get in trouble for possession of a firearm, and then that guy's going to get locked up for misprision of a felony.
Actually, no. Let me quantify how they look at it. If you're a concealed carry guy and you've got it on your hip, the general consensus. And by the way, here's the problem with it: there's no law that says it is or it isn't. Right? It's up to the determining factor of the police officer who was involved to make a determination: did the felon have access or not? Which automatically tells me there's something desperately wrong there. Number two, it's then up to the prosecutor to determine whether or not he actually wants to prosecute the case.
Well, and I agree with you there. So the problem is you have a lot of people that hate guns, and they hate gun owners, and they grow up become prosecuting attorneys. So
right.
Yeah, it's luck of the draw with who you get as far as a DA or prosecuting. But I'm wondering if I'm carrying concealed, I'm legal to do so. My proximity to a felon in the cab of my own truck makes me a felon?
Well, no. It makes the felon guilty of constructive possession.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure who was the object.
I'm sorry, and I should have clarified that. What happens is they can charge. Let's assume I'm a felon. Okay, so let's assume I'm riding in your car with you, and you've got a shotgun in the back of the car, or in the back of the window for all I care. Right?
Right.
We get pulled over. You're not a felon. I am. The cop says, well, wait a second. There's a shotgun in the back seat here. And he can literally charge the felon with constructive possession of a felon in constructive possession of a firearm in violation of the law.
I'm with you.
Okay. Now, that guy goes to jail for just being in the car.
But the owner of the gun, okay,
nothing happens to him. He's in lawful possession.
But the problem is if he knows that you being in constructive possession of the gun is illegal.
They're never going to win that one, and they know it, so they don't ever prosecute the gun owner. But in fact, if you look at the way the law is written, that person is guilty of misprision of a felony because they know about a felony being committed and they're not doing anything about it. Perhaps, but the reality is
it's twisted, but I get it.
You know what it is? The reality is they go after the low-hanging fruit. Let's be honest, right? And they're not going to win a prosecuting case by saying we're going to charge Joe for allowing Mike to be in proximity to a gun. You get it? No, because everybody in the jury would start laughing that one off.
Okay.
But irrespective of how that happens, what I'm saying is, in regard to the idea that a felon can't have a firearm in their home, your husband or your wife or your children are all barred from having a firearm, which means that they've been barred because unless they want their father and their mother to go back to prison. Get it?
Yeah.
So everybody's rights are limited because the felon lives in the house.
It's the federal version of nullification.
Wow. Reverse nullification. Wow. You got a brilliant mind. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's the federal government's opinion or idea of reverse nullification.
Right.
It's kind of like reverse racism applied in a federal way, right? So yeah, you're absolutely right. And look, you know what? My argument still stands. If you have not committed an actual violent crime, the federal government nor the state government has any right to bar you from owning a firearm. They have no business barring an individual who's guilty of a crime 5, 10, 20, 25, 30 years ago from owning a firearm. I don't care. I'm tired of it, and it's time that people actually started a national dialogue about it. Just because somebody made a mistake when they were 18 or 20 years old and got caught with a half ounce of weed when they were a stupid young teenager doesn't mean that person should be prohibited for life from ever owning a gun.
Well, and that's the thing. Our nation has become a nation of laws, and we've lost sight of justice.
Actually, that's the problem. We're not a nation of laws anymore. We're a nation of subjective prosecution with a whole litany of laws that we can pick from to determine how we can penalize or pummel this poor person into a grease spot on the ground. That's the problem. You see, a nation of laws says that the Constitution is the law of the land, and it applies across the board. Find me the government that is monitoring and adhering to the Constitution, and then I'll agree with you that we're a nation of laws, because the law has to apply to all across the board evenly, not just to those who are too poor to defend themselves. Right?
I agree, yeah.
And that's where the problem comes in.
That there's no justice anymore. It's
exactly.
Not, it's not fair and balanced. It's not...
Justice is in the hands of the biased. That's the simple reality of it. Justice is in the hands of people who, for whatever, whether it's for their own personal, report card approval or their own career, or their own, boredom or their own bias about and hatred of firearms or drugs or whatever, to make the determination as to whether or not you're going to be prosecuted, and that's wrong.
I agree.
Because we can't trust people.
I'm going to have to give it good talking to you,
sir.
You
too, sir. Thank you very much for the call. Appreciate your thoughts.
Have a great weekend.
Right, you too. Go ahead, caller. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The half ounce of weed got me just a little bit because I had a friend when we were younger that did his tour in Vietnam and came home having a little trouble with the vivid nightmares, so he smoked some. He went with a carnival that summer to make money and stuff, and instead of trying to rely on wherever I'm going to finding my weed and stuff, he took enough with him that it would suffice him through the summer. Therefore, when he got busted, it was possession, which made it moved it up from a misdemeanor to a felony.
Right.
His entire life he had to live with the fact that he had a felony conviction against him and stuff, and it was just something he was trying to cope with life with from going over there and serving his country, number one. And I don't get me wrong, I'm not a marijuana advocate, but sometimes those guys come back with really vivid nightmares.
Sure.
And stuff. And he lived his entire life as a felon because he spent time in federal penitentiary.
Yep. Because
of his amount of marijuana exceeded the amount of just usage, and it went up to the point that they said that he was a dealer at that point.
Gotcha. Distribution, sure.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for the call. You hear the music in the background. We're going to get cut. Folks, we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now.
News Talk for Missouri and Arkansas. 107.1 KBMV, Birch Tree, West Plains. The Point.
Fox News Radio. I'm Chris Foster. The new Pope, Francis, speaking to reporters at the Vatican